And boom. Oh. Boom. According to that, we are live. Let me bring the camera up close. Good to see you all. I've been trying to get the comments going on the side. It didn't work, so I'm just going to capture them here directly off the screen that I'm looking at, which I'm looking at anyway. And you know what? Actually, given that the emojis don't show up properly on the chat within Streamlabs OBS, this is probably a better way. Just to make sure this is indeed live, because I reinstalled Streamlabs to try to get this going today. Technical issues, you know, they're a feature, not a bug. But yeah, I did my best with it. Obviously, it didn't work out exactly right. But the good news is now I can show you exactly what I'm seeing when I'm seeing it as I scroll up and down and whatnot as well. So that's probably a good thing, actually. Yeah, maybe I'll go back to this for a while. It's a little bit skinny in the middle of the screen right now, but yeah, actually, it's kind of cool. In fact, let's tempt fate let's make that checkbox a little bit bigger even, because why not? Chat on screen, let's make it easier to see. Boom, boom. You know what, I could actually put this all the way over here, like if you like. I always ask you to do that anyway. Yeah, let's just put it there. Well, nice and big, clear. Actually, you know what? This is probably better than usual. Got a bunch of, well, got kind of not a whole lot of topics, but still a lot of things to talk about tonight. Hope that everyone is well. Hope that everyone is staying safe. I guess if you're following me on Twitter or whatnot, you can still see what is going on. Running adjustments. Let's do that. Well, you know what? That looks kind of cool. Yeah, that's good enough. So, yeah, as you can see, there are, yeah, still increasing cases in Japan. Going to talk about that today. We've had a couple of war anniversaries this week, of course, with the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombing. So we've got that to talk about. There's the increasing drama. Of course, there's the terrible thing that happened in Lebanon, which I won't talk about directly because I'm not. There are some aspects of that which I think are interesting. Of course, the whole TikTok drama, which, you know, I've never used TikTok myself, but I do find parts of it I get and parts of it I'm a little bit worried about. I'll talk a little bit about that. I've got lots of topics. Remember, as always, you can @Mark_Simon. If you do that, I will engage. That's what it's for. So please say hello. Yeah, it's always, and plus, even not just, you know, talk to me, just it's nice to see who's out there. And as always, remember, if you like if you like this and you want to show some support, always appreciate, one, if you say hello, it's just nice to see who's out there, and two, remember to like the video if you like. So first of all, we've got Bald Berlitz Boy. Oh, is that Ronin Shonin? Bald Berlitz Boy, is that Ronin Shonin? I never realized that was you. Okay, well, good to see you, Bull Berlitz Boy. Good to have you. Good that you've got your gargle ready. I feel like actually now I need some gargle just as I start to talk. Not good timing. Maybe that Osaka governor is onto something. That is something we're going to talk about this week. GargleGate. That is a thing that happened. We've got the J-Vlog. Made it first time in 3 weeks. You didn't fall asleep after class. Well, that's right. If class doesn't put you to sleep, you came to the right place. The J-Vlog. Excellent to have you, and salutations. Travis Moore, excellent to see you as always. Chofas, good time. First time here. Looking forward to it. Well, awesome to have you here, Chofas. I hope you held on while I was sorting out my technical issues on the side there, but excellent to see you there. I guess it's going to be more obvious if I skip past somebody now, but yeah, you can see what I'm seeing, so that's a good thing. Who else we got in here? Shofas, excellent to see a nice emoji game there. I like to see that. We've got Jeremiah Kettner. loading. Excellent. We've got Tech Art 2, Ohio, and other state greetings. Very clever. I see what you did there, Tech Art 2. Good to see you as always. We've got Andrew Morboy. Hello. Waiting for the boom. That's right. Well, look, I fixed it. By the way, what do you, I mean, this is a bit agricultural, as we say in New Zealand. It's a bit improvised, but I think this actually, you know what? This actually looks better than having the comments. So, you know, than having Streamlabs trying to pick them up and having to deal with that. So, yeah, plus I can see all of Andrea Morboy's emoji, so that's a good thing. Who else? Quint Rankid, excellent to see you as always. Travis Moore, test 1 2, Lysander 45. Actually remember to catch one of these. Well, thanks for remembering. I always appreciate that. Mr. Cordy Champ, glad that you made it. Thought that Obi-Wan was going to make a guest appearance here. Whoa, Obon. Yeah, Obon War Anniversaries. Obon War is like Obi-Wan, I guess. Good call there. We've got, indeed, Andrea Morboy struggling to stay awake. Must be the lack of butter that's screwing up the comments. I don't know what it is with the comments, but hell, you know, I can figure out a way to do it better, as you can see. Showfuss, what's wrong with the comments? What's wrong with the comments is that Streamlabs OBS has an ingest feature where it actually natively loads the comments from YouTube and shows them, although it's been a little bit buggy and not working lately. And I always feel a little bit sad with that window on the side there. I like to look at you guys through the comments there and talk to you like as you type to me. And that's a fun part of the show, and I miss it when I do see your comments over there, but when it's not showing up on the screen, I feel like I'm missing that interaction with you guys. So now it's back. So that is a good thing. Anyone else in here? Oh, just jumped ahead to the end. Let's come back up. Let's just make sure I don't miss anybody. We've got Hika fell asleep before his own show. No, I did not. People talking about the comments issue. Glad to see that. We've got the boom gets jiggy, goes jiggy. Yes, get jiggy with it. Indeed, see from Berkeley, boom. That's right. We definitely have the boom now. We've got Tokyo 503. Are we good to go? We are good and going. I hope that you're seeing this. It's happened before where I've gotten this far into the show and I get to the most recent comment and it'll say the show still hasn't started, and I'll look and I'll notice that the show still hasn't started because I didn't click on the stream button properly, but it appears to be working. In fact, I can see myself going back there. So yes, indeed. We got, yeah, you got Razel Ghul, let the games begin. Indeed, Gotham's Reckoning. Good to have you here. Andrew Morboy struggling to stay awake. I know it's late there in Melbourne, so yes, indeed. Theodore Sharp, good to see you. Who else we got in here? Rian, please say hello. Erin, good to see you. Oh, glad I've got the chat fixed. Well, I didn't fix it, but I did better. I improved on it, so that's even better, right? Lewis. Hi from Portugal. Hey, the only Portuguese I know is Brazilian Portuguese, and only drinking Portuguese that I learned when I was backpacking when I was 20 years old. So, como vai? Good to see you. Welcome. Nice to have someone from Portugal watching, actually. It must be kind of early for you. So I guess it's earlier for people in America, but excellent to have you here. Will, hello. Good to see you. Leave me a comment here. It's always nice to say hello. BTC Chiba. Boom. Indeed. Good to have you in the comments and everybody else. I hope I haven't missed anybody. Andrea Morboy is yawning. Yes. And for some reason, as you can see now you see the world as I see it. Held for moderation. I mean, again, I have no idea why that was censored or why Mr. Kordychev. I think Mr. Kordychev's just handle name just triggers a lot of the moderation. FYI Tokyo, good to see you. Indeed, good to have you lurking here. Gregorio, yeah, good to see you. And anybody else who's watching, if you drink coffee now, you'll not sleep until 5 a.m. You don't drink coffee. Well, that's Mr. Kordychev, but do what you need to do. Or if you need to get to sleep, watch this. The Sergeant Bilko. 15:45 is not early. Indeed, I got that wrong, actually. It's afternoon in Europe and early morning in America, so... yes, I got that slightly wrong, but good to see you there in Sweden. Good to see we are all here. Please remember to say hello if you're in here. Let's get into the topics. Remember, as always, at Mark Me Hiko Simon, and you'll see it as I see it now. Now you're looking at through my eyes. My name will flash orange, and I will hopefully pay attention to that. And if I miss it, you can all tell me, hey, you missed the comment up above there. And have I gargled today? I have not gargled today, but we'll get to it. Doesn't make a difference. That's the punchline of that story. So let's go. Well, different countries have had different. And just at that moment, I get two direct comments. We've got Andrew Morboy, 1 week down, 5 more weeks of lockdown in Melbourne to go. Sorry about that. That sucks. But yes, do what you got to do there. I did see it unfolding, and yeah, Aaron in Indiana having breakfast. Interested in my thoughts on TikTok? Yes, indeed. Well, I will get to those. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's not an easy issue, although. Yes, I have very, very, very mixed feelings about that. So I will get to that indeed. 11:40 p.m. in Australia. We've got 3:45 in Portugal, I'm guessing. Sergeant Book was saying on behalf of Portuguese time zone, although you're in Swedish time zone. I don't know if it's the same as Portugal or not. An early morning there in Indiana. Great to have you all indeed. So yeah. First thing is, we've had all these stories of different country leaders around the world, like for example, leaders like Angela Merkel in Germany, who seem to have done a good job. I come from New Zealand, and New Zealand's leaders, of course, seem to have a good job. 100 days without I believe a death, I think is the case. There are new cases that come in of people returning to the country. But in terms of like community spread in New Zealand, they've of course done an excellent job. So indeed, there are countries like New Zealand that have actually done an excellent job. There are countries like Germany which have gotten lots of praise, even though by every measure they've done orders of magnitude worse than Japan. And then there are countries like Japan. Well, then there are countries like the UK that, or forget about UK. I mean, UK. The response has generally been considered not to be so great. But then you've got in countries like Sweden, indeed, which is, I guess, generally considered, or some people say it was good, and look, they didn't do anything, and other people point out that they've had, again, orders of magnitude more deaths than here. And I think even people who advised on that policy are now starting to say, yeah, they were hoping for things like herd immunity. That doesn't look like it's a thing. And then you got like America and, Brazil and so on, which are doing badly, and they're suffering for that. Japan is in this weird position where in terms of results it's done relatively well, but in terms of like perception of the government relating to all of this, the Japanese government's popularity, the blue line is approval and the red line is disapproval. And basically for the whole time Abe's been in power, it's always been pretty solidly above the red line there. And it's plummeted. And part of this is Abe, I think 7 weeks, he didn't even hold a press conference. He's kind of left the response up to the governors, which are basically the equivalent of like state governors in the US. And they all have sort of different ideas and contradict each other. And if they start getting too uppity, the ministers sort of slam them. But, the Japanese central government has sort of appeared rudderless. And it seems to have worked well enough until now. But with things like Go to Japan, which I've been talking about how ridiculous that is, how like in a time when everything is, it's like they're trying to come up with the very worst suggestions, like they're trying to be helpful in the worst ways possible. It's almost like they're trying to make it worse, and everyone's like, what's wrong with the government? So that's coming out there, and that's kind of a trend. Going in reverse order, these are from a week ago, so maybe less relevant to today, but very quickly as well. A lot of commentary how like for example, the New York Times moved its Hong Kong bureau in light of the new security law to Seoul, and a lot of people saying, see, they went to Seoul because Tokyo, isn't as friendly or whatever. In Seoul, they're trying really hard to be press friendly. I think while there's a lot of hue and cry from the press corps in Japan, the international press corps in Tokyo, that for example. A lot of press in Japan is, on the one hand, there isn't censorship in Japan. Like the government doesn't intervene and take away broadcast licenses or, censor news articles or do anything like that. They do control access to information in terms of through this press club system, which, Japanese affiliated registered press club members are given separate. Normally, the only press conferences that are given are for press club, and people who are not members, i.e. from the tabloid newspapers or the foreign press, sometimes they'll get a separate press conference, but normally they won't get anything. And the thing about the press conference system is, of course, that the Keisha Club system, the Keisha Club system, I should have said, rather than press conference, it's the press club system, is that, it's all kind of based on mutual cooperation. When police want to put out a story, like they want to put pressure on someone in custody to confess, and they want to put a story out into the news to increase the pressure on them. The idea is when they put out a story that, we think this person did this and this person said this when they were being interrogated, which is really kind of unethical to use the press to broadcast that. The press will put it out. They'll do whatever the police ask them to do because otherwise they'll risk being denied their Keisha Club membership and access into these press conferences. So there's these kind of mechanisms to control, particularly from government information in Japan, which really frustrates foreign press. And it's not exactly the same as censorship. And of course, if you want the idea that Japanese press is censored per se, I mean, just pick up any racy weekly magazine or newspaper or tabloid, and you can see that there is freedom here, but it's weird. It's all very stage managed. However, out of stated frustration with that, or at least being one of the factors, it's interesting that they chose Seoul. On the one hand, I kind of get that from, and some journalists are using this as an opportunity to say, haha, see, Tokyo didn't get it because you guys suck. And I kind of get it from that industry perspective, but there again, I mean, I go to Seoul periodically for work and whatnot. I've spent time over there. It's actually, Seoul has been amazing. Like when I first went there, like 20 years ago, just after I came to Japan, Seoul was less developed than I thought it would be. I thought it would be closer to Japan, and I was really kind of surprised around year 2000 or 1999 going to Seoul, and how like in neighborhoods like Itaewon was just a grungy like cowboy bar hellhole. Literally, it was like U.S. military country western bars with signs either saying no Koreans or Koreans only on every door. The footpaths weren't paved in a lot of places. Like buildings, everything was sort of like, even nice looking buildings you go in and they'd all be under construction or in a mess. And I thought, wow, this place is sort of trying to look like it's developed, and it's really not. It's actually a lot further behind than I thought. Then I went 10 years later, and then 5 years later, and you go over to Seoul now, and like Itaewon, that place is gentrified like hell. I mean, that reminds me of a flash, nice neighborhood like Omotesando or something in Tokyo. So Seoul has really come along in terms of its development. But, for me, there are still things when you're over there that I notice. Just one. I mean, the air pollution there is terrible. That's not their fault. They can't really do much about that. But a lot of that just sort of blows across from China. But of course, things like SIM cards. A lot of the web, starting with porn, but not just porn. A lot of the web there is censored. Sometimes just particular types of web searches will come up that this page is not accessible for national security reasons. They have social media laws that you have to register your real name and your real profile with in-country social media. There's a lot of direct out of the need in Korea for being afraid of North Korean subversives and spies and whatnot. You are more aware there. You see a lot more soldiers and guards and so on, and it does feel a lot more security conscious, and a little bit, it doesn't feel as free. I mean, there is just no control of anything in Japan, as you can see. Like the moment you get off the plane here, to me, it's kind of mind-boggling how much monitoring there is of people in places like Korea and China, and how much they accept it. When, if it's happening in Japan, they're doing a really good job of hiding it. It's hard to imagine that the Japanese government being competent enough to do it, let alone the need for that information. It's just really incompatible. You might assume that Japan's probably secretly spying on Japanese citizens as well, and I don't know. I really don't think that that's the case, actually. And you feel the difference, I think. So I think you're actually more at risk of being monitored and influenced in a way over there, although at the same time, credit to them, they've actually done policies to show that they're opening up. So yeah, that was a thing. Looking back through the comments, Chofus, to me, do I really believe in the low number of deaths in Japan? Chofus, well, I trust that the data is being collected honestly. It's never 100%, but the interesting thing is that mortality. So one way that they could tell in America that they thought that the number of COVID-19 deaths were being underreported was they'd look at overall mortality. They'd look at the total number of people dying every month. And they could see if there was like a gap where they said there were, 1,000 COVID-19 deaths, but there were 10,000 more deaths than usual. That would imply, some of those must have been COVID-19. In Japan, for most months, like since February or January when this really started to break, except for April, where clearly there was a really big spike in deaths from COVID-19, mortality is less than usual in Japan. Which is to say that the voluntary staying indoors and whatnot is actually causing people who would be dying from the flu and catching other diseases and whatnot. They're staying at home and they're not getting sick as much. So other causes are happening less, which implies that, I don't think that Japan's catching every death per se, but they are probably doing a pretty good job. And in terms of the sort of exponential missing of deaths that was showing up in statistics in like the UK and the USA, I'd say Japan's doing better than those countries at accurately reflecting the number of deaths, which shows that Japan is still doing relatively well. So, do I believe the low number of deaths? Yeah, to that extent I do. I also don't think that the central government is manipulating the numbers that get reported. The numbers get reported and collected based on reporting in local health bureaus, which are like little police boxes, which report up by little fax machines up to each local state government, and each state, each prefecture in Japan reports the numbers separately on the same schedule every day. There's no central aggregation or publishing of those numbers, so there's no real opportunity for the central government to manipulate it, in spite of what a lot of people in Japan, a lot of foreigners in Japan would see the numbers and say, oh, they're trying to manipulate the numbers for the Olympics or something like that. But the whole one, there's thousands of people involved in collecting this information, so they'd all have to be in on the conspiracy. And it just implies a degree of control and management and conspiracy that's not possible. So I don't think the numbers are being faked. They've definitely made mistakes with the numbers. And Tokyo has at times increased, saying that last month there were more deaths than we reported. And this happens when things like they sometimes go to elderly homes and they get those numbers later and they add them in. But even those corrections have been like up to 100. Yeah, again in April, I think they made an adjustment of something like 100 extra deaths that they found from elderly homes that later on were confirmed as having been related to this. But yeah, overall, I find that credible. So yeah, thank you for the question, Shof. It's good to have you there in the comments. So yes, this is interesting here. This was Nick Kapoor tweeted this. This is a sheet that was given, combat phrases that was given to occupation troops, or troops actually in the Pacific Theater in World War II for speaking to Japanese people. And it's kind of funny, although the phrases are Romanized, and it doesn't really make sense to me if I look at this. Te o a ge te, but it's kind of funny. It doesn't make sense when you read it, but when you say it, it kind of makes sense. Like, for example, if I see the second line, I've been in Japan too long, so that first, I guess if you don't speak Japanese, you'll read that buki. But because I've lived in Japan, I see boke. Boke means you imbecile. It literally means you Alzheimer's person, but it's something that people, like in the old sort of Three Stooges sort of thing, they'll say boke is like a put down for someone acting dopey. Otose, but it's kind of something buki o otose, drop your weapons. These are actually kind of good approximations. It's a little bit alarming that they are telling the troops as they prepare to tell people how to take their clothes off. Hifuku o nuge. Yeah, nuge. I mean, again, if they just read it phonetically, they were suruna. Yeah. Okake, sit down. It kind of works. I mean, I'm sure glad they don't teach Japanese like this now, but this is just really fascinating. A lot of people were sharing this. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'm seeing Japan, apart from the fact that they put out a lot of content and it's quite deep and good content and so on, I have noticed lately that they've been featuring people like Sarah Ichikawa and a couple. They've spent a lot more time sort of dedicated to promoting sort of women's perspective stories and feminist stuff, which is a good thing. It's kind of, yeah, there were a number of tweets this week sort of highlighting that the head of the gynecological Doctors Association of Japan mentioned that there's apparently talk in Japan of making the morning after pill available over the counter from pharmacies. And the Gynecological Doctors Association is thinking, it actually came out and he didn't just say, I think this is a good idea or a bad idea for medical reasons, or they need to see a doctor or anything like that. Like if you're a doctor and you want to be clever, you might say this is a great opportunity to improve, women's access to necessary medical care. Or if you're against it and you're a doctor, you would expect, if I was the lawyer writing the thing, I would assume that they'd want to say something like, oh, there are dangerous side effects from this, and they really should consult with the proper doctor first, and they should come to us. But no, the head of the doctors, the head of the Japan Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, issued a public statement saying, well, Japanese women are not really very well educated and shouldn't really be trusted to make decisions about their health, like relating to gynecology. And so, they're opposing it basically because the head of the Association for Gynecologists thinks that women are just uneducated and can't be trusted to make appropriate decisions about using the morning after pill. That's kind of nuts. I mean, again, this is the same group of doctors who were politically influential in having Japan being alongside North Korea as the final countries in the world. And Japan in the 1990s, before the pill was legalized, took 30 years to legalize the pill. at the same time, it was funny. The pill, after 30 years of trying to get it legalized, they finally got it legalized and approved for doctors to use, because the doctors themselves used to make so much money off abortions. That used to be a lot more routine. I think they still are quite routine in Japan. Maybe that's why they don't want the morning after pills. However, Viagra, when it came out, Viagra got approved before the before the pill, before the contraceptive pill. It got approved by the Diet in 6 months in a special emergency session. And when this happened, this kind of highlighted not only the hypocrisy and misogyny of the politicians who are approving this, but also, the doctors who are supposed to be, these are the people that you're supposed to go to for women's health. And here they are saying that women are too dumb to be trusted with the morning after pill. So that was a thing. And again, if you want to read more about this, it's a great Twitter account to follow, and it's a good blog. So definitely check that out. So I'll take out too. For some reason, that guy is still single. We will never know why. I guess you're talking about that head doctor guy, and yeah, I guess so. The J-Vlog, I know a little about this. Maybe you can explain about Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 drugs. I cannot explain about Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 drugs. In terms of medical stuff about what's over the counter, what requires a prescription, I don't know. I know that Japan has a really conservative drug approval process, which means that the pharmaceutical companies here operate very differently. And I know that it requires legislative approval, but in terms of the classifications and the difference, I don't know. So the J-Vlog, please feel free to drop the information into the comments. It's showing up on the screen, and I would appreciate that if you know some more about it. Lysander 45, how much do I think the government opinion is shaped by government conversations about why Japanese women need to get back into their house and breed? There are, no question, there are mainly octogenarian voices in the LDP who have in the past described the birth rate problem in Japan as one of women being baby-making machines that are not working properly, and we must do what will get the machines working properly again. I mean, literally, summing up their perception of women and their role in society is basically being a set of genitals to produce, offspring. And that's the reason that you have a birth rate problem. Again, I mean, I don't think you can have an 80-year-old causing contributing to the population anymore at this point. But that kind of mentality, at least the fact that they feel like they're, well, again, came in for a lot of criticism when the statement was made. This was like 10 years ago now. But the fact that people still think that they could say that in Parliament and not even realize that that's a stupid thing to say highlights that, there are definitely some issues. And again, when they talk about this, there are typically very conservative voices. But remember, the LDP is a very conservative party, and they are basically the ruling party. And there are voices within that party that say things like joint custody of children. Or, even the debate about the pill, the idea that if women can control, their own ability to get pregnant, that this will lead to the sort of feminist revolution in Japan that happened in America. And now you look at America and you see all the divorces and all the unstable families, and aren't Japanese traditional values much better than what we've seen in Western countries that have given into feminism and allow women to control their own reproductive system. And the thing is, and when they have this, the worst thing about it is they'll wheel out a woman who is saying this normally, like 60 years old and far-right conservative. It's always funny how you can always pull out advocates against themselves. It's like the Republicans in America wheeling out a black guy to say, yeah, we shouldn't give welfare to black people just because they're minorities, and look at me. And they find people to say that just to sort of, which kind of makes it worse. Japan, very much the same sort of thing with regards to, and it's not feminism. I mean, this is just normal, basic human rights stuff. So kind of crazy anyway. It's just straight up equality. If it was men, it's not feminist. If this was men, if the situations were reversed, this wouldn't even be a debate. That's the point. Nice to see, by the way, Tai Nakamura. Good to see you, sir. And good to see you, Shubus from Panama. Excellent to have you here. Hardcore sexism indeed. Sainted Sir, good to see you. Welcome. Yes, I think Theodore Sharp, your comment got held up for genitals. Men can be genitals too. Well, that's right. In fact, the irony is a lot of men sometimes want to be seen as genitals. I mean, I know plenty of people that I think of as genitals, although not in a complimentary way. So yes, indeed. Flagged. YouTube doesn't like the word genitals, I guess. Genitals, genitals, genitals. We'll see what happens to the video. I'm going to lose my 50 cents monetization. Who cares? But yes, don't worry. Theodore Sharp, as you can see, your comments will show no matter what, given the way that I am capturing them. So that's all good. TikTok. Aaron, you wanted to hear about TikTok. Here comes TikTok. Can't say the G word. We shall call it the G word. TikTok. Where to begin? So look, I tweeted a series of thoughts of this. Actually, I had Tom Fallon. He uses his name and his Twitter handle, so I can say that. He asked me some questions about this, like because I tweeted a bunch of articles about this, which sort of pointed out that this could be a very dangerous sort of step. And he said, "Do you really know about China?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Have you ever heard of the Opium Wars?" I've been reading a lot about this lately. And you should follow these Twitter accounts that show all this sort of uncensored information about how terrible China is. He's a good guy, and and it's good that people are learning a lot about China and whatnot. I've been following this like forever, I don't want to at the same time, I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to talk about China as a show, but I have an opinion about this, and there's two things about this whole thing that wind me up a little bit that are opposing. On the one hand, I agree with the TikTok ban. Because Twitter is not available in China. When I've gone to China, I was cut off from Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, every Google service, most Apple services. China prohibits, and not only do they ban all non-Chinese, social media, including TikTok itself is banned in China. The ByteDance has a TikTok within China, and there's a separate, within the Great Firewall, and then they have this company outside the firewall. So the irony is, even TikTok itself is actually banned in China because, the government there is so determined to control information. And, so on the one hand, I sort of think, well, this should at least be mutual. The idea that we allow them to have, that we allow Chinese companies to operate here, and yet that China doesn't allow foreign companies even to exist in China. And what this goes back to, I won't spend forever on this, but there's when I was doing politics at university, I was there 1994 through 1998, and this was just after the fall of the Eastern Europe, and everyone was analyzing, didn't we do well? Look at that, communism defeated. Tiananmen, we thought it was going to end in China as well. It didn't. It didn't happen, but everyone was so convinced that basically. There was a really popular theory that went around at the time, which was Francis Fukuyama's End of History. It was sort of it was an essay that he wrote, which basically postulated that the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and frankly, the Chinese gave up on communism as a system as well. They still have a totalitarian system, but you can actually, since the 90s in China, you own property or whatever. Everything's not owned by the state anymore. You can have private companies in China. So they've given up communism as well. They're not communist. They call themselves the Communist Party, but they're not really that communist anymore. And he pointed out they used to, the last great battle of ideologies, free market capitalism versus communism. In the end of the day, with communism sort of collapsing on itself and the rest of the world basically just sort of being free and open and liberal and democratic, and observing that no democratic country has ever become, and this was at that time in 1990, no democratic country has ever switched to become anti-democratic or totalitarian, and no capitalist countries ever, socialist countries have collapsed, but capitalism just by nature, it's sort of anarchic and it survives. He postulated that this was the end of history in terms of debates about economic systems and political systems, and that basically liberal democracy was just like the inevitable end result of every country going through its coming of age and exploration of different ideologies. And at the end of the day, when countries become wealthy and people are well educated and everyone's doing well, they inevitably will become democratic. They'll all go and choose democracy and free market trade. Look at Eastern Europe. And there was a belief, and this is something that I believed in. I bought into this myself at the time when I was in university. I thought, like Eastern Europe, Every country is just going to transition to this, and the more you help countries economically to, have a big middle class that demands more democratic rights and more free, open economy, the more it just becomes inevitable that they're just going to switch to this. And remember that a lot of these revolutions in Eastern Europe were bloodless. There was it was like an evolution that it went to that. So this informed a foreign policy of not just America, but most of the world in the 1990s that, okay, China's still closed. It still wants everything done on its terms and whatnot. But you know what? Let's help them a little bit. If we invest a lot in China, if we open up their economy and allow them to trade with us, and even though they're not comfortable on those terms being equal and mutual, well, they're kind of poor and developing and they're making excuses. But look, if we help them become wealthy, if we help their economy, it's okay if we don't have the same mutual terms, because they'll naturally choose democracy and they'll choose open and free trade, and things will improve over time if we get the ball rolling by helping them. So, from the 1990s, we basically opened up where we allowed Chinese companies to operate, in our, in the West and, in other free market capitalist countries. Even though China doesn't allow foreign, to operate a company in China, it has to be majority local, or 51% of the company for them, and they have to give 51% minimum ownership to that person to operate. And the Chinese government does not allow things like social media and so on, because they want to control speech. And, we basically accepted this unequalness because we just thought, just show them. If we give them a little taste of how good it is, they'll change on their own. What we didn't expect, and what seems to have happened with China, is that, well, partly I think the Tiananmen Square massacre is a part of it. I think the government there realizes that if the country liberalizes and becomes democratic, there's a risk that they will be held accountable for all the bad things that they did. And they did some really bad things in 1989 to sort of stop this. And so they took the wealth that China was sort of generating, and they invested it in beefing up the firewall and beefing up the sort of the barriers to basically protect the government, controlling freedom of speech and whatnot. So the expectation that just by making them rich that they'd become liberal and democratic didn't play out, although it's what people believed they would achieve by being, by basically giving them a leg up. And that's how we got to where we are. And there is a situation right now that, part of me thinks, it should be mutual. We should be, when we have the bilateral free trade agreements, they should be required to allow companies from Japan or from Australia or from Britain or from, anywhere to operate within China the same way that Chinese companies are allowed to operate here. And to the extent that, whether it's for a security threat or whatever, I think the idea that companies like, so if there's a deal coming up, that if there's a free trade deal that's going to allow Google, it's going to allow Twitter to operate in China, and when they sign that, also TikTok or whatever will come back, and WeChat will come back, I think that's a worthy purpose. And from that perspective, I actually support it as a type of hardball with China in terms of negotiating. What I don't like about this is that I don't think that guy pointing there is really doing this out of a sincere strategic attempt to correct a slightly misled, misguided, idealistic policy of thinking that they could help China liberalize and become democratic and free more quickly by helping them to become wealthy in the 90s. He's not doing it out of that. This is opportunism, and his, to me, again, my read is that his motivations are actually very similar to those of the people running China itself. If you ask me, again, I doubt that. I mean, who gives a crap about TikTok? It's a video dancing service. I mean, even if the Chinese government is spying on it, which is not necessarily. I mean, perhaps they have access to the servers, but the idea that they're spying or manipulating it or whatever. But again, when those TikTokers bought those million tickets to that Oklahoma rally to spoil the thing for him, well, maybe he saw that as a Chinese government-driven campaign or something. Certainly that got his attention, but it looks like retaliation. And, in Duterte, in Philippines, a democratically elected, but a guy who likes to act like an authoritarian, when for the first time in 25 years, a couple of television stations came up for the renewal of their licenses, he just said no because they were critical of him, and he shut them down. And this looks a little bit like it's got a dual purpose of it's making him look tough on China, but it also looks like it's retaliation and trying to instill fear in other media outlets, which makes me think as well, when you saw that crazy interview this week with on HBO of Axiom, I think it's called, the network with HBO subsidiary, where he just looked like a monkey through the whole thing. It does make me wonder if, HBO is going to be forced to sell Axiom next, and he wants to get a cut of it. I mean, so it looks like a mafia move on top of everything else. So I doubt the motives and sincerity. While I agree with the idea that China should be brought into line and, the free trade should be held on the basis of equality, and to that end, I think that there is a correction that needs to be made between the West and China. I mean, and by the way, this goes back to the 90s. I don't care about the current sort of tensions and paranoia. But I don't believe that the current policy and this is actually linked to that. And in terms of the security threat, or if you want to talk about security threat, there are plenty of Chinese companies that are a greater security threat than bloody TikTok, for Christ's sake. So the fact that that's being targeted, to me, I think has more to do with him actually wanting to, and this is why there are people talking about, is the US on the brink of vetting like media companies that are allowed to operate and kind of setting up a second sort of isolated internet, in America, which in a sense is this America becoming like, is this America putting on China to sort of pressure it to open up and, join the rest of the world? Or is this America moving towards becoming like China? And it could be either thing. And I worry, given that guy, that it's actually the latter. And for that, I am deeply concerned. And plus the other thing as well is, all of a sudden everyone's a China expert, because, people are hitting the pro wrestling, hey, let's have a war drumbeat again. It's like everybody became Iraq experts 10 years ago. That's a little bit alarming, and that's not the sort of, these issues go back centuries, right? And, there's a lot of right and wrong on both sides, and you can figure out how to work these things out the smart way. But the idea that right now America, just for political purposes, is trying to generate conflict, again, we've seen this pattern happen over and over, including World War II. I mean, including the anniversaries that I'm about to talk about. So I really don't like a lot of the sudden, China needs to go screw itself or something like that. China's 1 billion normal people with kind of a crappy government, but honestly a government that right now I worry, is the US trying to police China, or is it actually aspiring to become like China? I mean, I don't know that the US is actually in a much of a better position, in which case it just becomes two bad guys, two heels pro wrestling with each other, which I've got no interest in. But look, there are legitimate problems with China that I think strategically and correctly should be fixed. So this is where I'm torn, to the extent that, this is trying to correct some mistakes from being overly idealistic. Back in the 90s, this is a good idea to put pressure on China about these things, but it doesn't look like that. And when I see the tone of my American friends and so on Twitter, and the way that people are suddenly talking about China, like, they've got it coming now, they've got it coming. When Americans start saying that, it's like they're looking for wars. I don't like that at all. So that's where I am on that. There's a lot of people posting questions to me, so I will come back, and I don't want to talk too much more about this, but I saw a lot of comments coming to me. So Tech Art 2, for some, thank heavens it's not that many. Class 3. Oh, thank you for the comment there, the J-Vlog. I'll pass on that, but people can read that. In fact, I'll show that. Herbals, no side effects. Class 2. Okay, so that's all you know. Okay, that's interesting. Andrew Mobile, I need a VPN. Do I need a VPN, or you mean in Korea people use VPNs, but again, I was using a VPN. I actually had the Wi-Fi transmitter on a phone that I was using in Seoul. When I was using a VPN, just like break, like the phone broke, like in a weird way. And I don't know. That was just like, that was on the hotel's Wi-Fi, and that was weird. Like I was eating breakfast, and I don't know. I always felt a bit spooked in South Korea, although nothing too extreme. In China, yeah. By the way, Andrew Mobile, you've no doubt heard the news about the Hong Kong VPN companies that are now getting rated up and being asked for their customer lists and whatnot. So that whole VPN thing, even in China, looks like those days are numbered. They didn't, they're technically regulated, but it looks like now they're cracking down on it. But of course, yeah, until now, a lot of people have used VPN. Oh, so you're talking about using Twitter in China. Yeah. I know it's possible, but I was just there for a week at a time. And honestly, I didn't want to do anything to get in trouble. I know it's possible to do, though. Serpensa, yes, I follow Serpensa, and they are the channels, I guess, to follow if you want. Exactly, Aaron, it's an excellent channel, and if you're actually interested in a sort of view like this on China by someone who has also lived in China for like 20 years and is extremely well informed, Serpensa is fascinating. I watch every video that he puts out, highly recommended. So good recommendation there, Aaron. And the Y86 as well. And the J-Vlog, incorrect. Only if the company employs over 100 people, they must have CCP committee within your corp. Well, all I know is about the ownership rules. In fact, that's not true. No, that's absolutely not true. I've dealt with merger and acquisition, M&A transactions involving setting up companies in China and acquiring companies that operate in China. The idea that they have to employ CCP, I think you're talking about like the union reps and so on. But look, in terms of the ownership requirements, those are definitely very isolated. The CCP thing, I think that's a bit of internet parallel. It might be true in some places, but I don't think that it's a national. That never came up in any of the M&A transactions that I did. That they have to be Communist Party members. And this is again where I just worry that there's all this this starts to sound like the anti-Muslim hysteria a little bit to me, which makes me cringe a little bit. Yeah. Christopher Luke, rich people are so liberal indeed. Well, like I say, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It's obviously clearly not worked out that way. Tokyo 503, don't think Nikolai Ceausescu would agree if the communism transition totally bloodless. It was mostly not bloodless. And by the way, I actually went to Galatz where there was shooting. There were bullet holes in the building where I stayed in 1993 in Galatz in eastern Romania. So yeah, I know. There was some shooting, but even in Romania, and Nikolai Ceausescu, who, tried to hold on, and the secret police, that country was a bit like in North Korea within Eastern Europe as well. It was not regular. But I'm thinking, obviously most countries, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland and whatever, there were some people who, it was by and large pretty smoothly bloodless, right? Look, even in Russia, they shelled the parliament at one point. Indeed, in Romania, I think that the spying and the suppression of the society that was so strong, that was such a big machine to break, that was a little bit inevitable, but still, it was still relatively, it didn't end up in a civil war thing, but that was certainly an exception. Good point, though, Tokyo 503 was legitimate point. The J-Vlog, why isn't reciprocal representation valid? I don't know what you mean by that. I just mean in terms of, trade should be on the same terms. Companies should be equally free to operate under the same terms under each other's countries, if you ask me. Probably Bandit Hiko Simon because he can't twerk. I'm sorry, this is too far back. I can't keep up anymore. Quint Rankid, in the pack, Northwest, a judge said the ACLU should decide who was a member of the press related to the riots. That's another thing that's happening. Good night, Andrea Mulboy. Have a good night. Steve from Berkeley, interesting thought. Though most of the rhetoric in the US is about ending censorship, not increasing it. But the rhetoric is just as well. Yeah. The problem is that I think the idea that, for example, the idea that right-wing media is being censored at the same time as the GOP president is taking down social media networks for national security reasons. But yeah, it seems a little bit over the top to me, and I worry about the motivations. And Aaron's saying, you're no expert on China, but there are definitely legitimate problems with China and heartbreaking how they treat their people, particularly in Xinjiang, indeed, and what's happening in Hong Kong. So yeah. And again, this is not a China show, and I'm not an expert on it, but certainly, but you take the Xinjiang thing. To me, that's again the most frustrating. So when that was happening and when there were stories coming out about it and the government wasn't saying anything, the first meeting that guy had with the president of China, he said, hey, that whole Xinjiang concentration camp for Muslim things, don't worry, I agree with it. That's what John Bolton said. And John Bolton, also a right-wing maniac who wanted a war with Iran. But his memoir said, that was like the first time he raised the subject was like to congratulate him on it. Which again means that when Trump is now saying, oh yeah, those concentration camps are terrible, I hate China, vote for me, is he really being sincere, or is that actually what he would like to do himself in America? And that's what I'm afraid of. There are legitimate reasons to challenge, and to have debate with China, but I feel like things are going towards conflict, so that is alarming. GargleGate. Let's talk about GargleGate. The governor of the popular, dashing, good-looking, young, well-spoken, and apparently intelligent until this week, governor of Osaka, who's gotten a bit of an idol type reputation among the governors. Osaka's done really well on the COVID-19 numbers until now. Per head of population, they've done much better than Tokyo, for example. And the governor there sort of bragged and said, "Yeah, we have an Osaka model where we're just better, and you can all feel free to copy us." And when they have when they had the Tokyo governor election a few months ago, all there's actually an Osaka political party called Ishin-no-Kai, and when they had members of that party campaigning in Tokyo, they would just have huge posters of the Osaka governor, which had me like why in the hell would we want to vote for someone because they're sponsored by the governor of the number 3 prefecture? But this is kind of how popular this guy was, and he's kind of had a good run until this week. He apparently, an Osaka-based university did some sort of research that said that this iodine gargle solution, which they give you for everything. Every time I go to the doctor with a sore throat, they give me some lozenges and some of this sort of Meiji ugai gargle medicine with iodine in it, which you mix with water and you gargle. And it's kind of funny, in the UK, I saw things about this last year where gargling generally is good in winter, like when it's dry and it gets your throat wet and it's good for avoiding colds and whatnot. Adding iodine or not adding it doesn't really seem to make a lot of difference, generally to catching colds. There was some sort of research which said it was helpful to patients who were recovering or that had it, but it's stopping it getting worse or something like that, like some statistical analysis that showed correlation at least. And that the Osaka governor thought, wow, these Osakan researchers have discovered that iodine-based gargle solution is the cure to COVID-19. I'm going to call the media and have a press conference at once where he lined up all these gargle brands and said, Osaka has discovered that the cure for COVID-19 is gargling iodine. And immediately, of course, everyone called him an idiot. And turned out that wasn't what the research was, and he kind of misled everybody. And of course, the other thing that happened was, in spite of that, well, half the people said he was an idiot and said that he's making it up and that's not what the research said. The other half of the people ran out and bought all the iodine gargle solution in Japan within hours of the press conference. So we didn't even get to the evening. And it was like the toilet paper a few months ago. All over the country. I mean, of course, in Osaka, all these women in tiger skin sort of cat suits and whatever, fighting, no doubt, at the pharmacies to go and get all the gargle solution. But it actually, even in Tokyo, there are, I guess the people who voted for wanting Tokyo to become part of Osaka, they all went out as well and they bought all the gargle solution. So the result of this is, apart from the fact that he had to clarify the next day that he didn't actually mean it was a cure or that it was helpful or it had any benefits for preventing COVID-19, just there was some statistical thing, but I just felt like saying that. The Japan Dentist Association has pointed out that now they need iodine solution as part of what they do. And they can't, some dentist hospitals are going to have to close because they can't stock with this stuff. So they're furious with him. And he actually said, well, listen, I need to be able to say what I feel, even if it's a mistake. And if I can't, if I can't do that, then I can't say anything. So I'm not sorry, even though it was wrong. So like I said, he's just gone from looking like a very smart person to looking like a very stupid person. I mean, it's not exactly hydrochloroquine or whatever that stupid thing was. But yeah, another guy, or the president of Belarus who declared that vodka will cure you from, and he caught it. So yeah, obviously. And it's maybe it's not as bad as that, but and who knows, if it was the governor of Tochigi, it probably would have been Nato, but it was Osaka. For some reason, it was Ugai Kusuri, and that's why probably we're not going to be able to buy Ugai Kusuri. Not that I would always get it, and it's always just a hassle to get a cup and put the drops in and gargle, and then you've got to wash the cup, but it's got stained by iodine. It's okay if you've got paper cups. Like when I was at work, I might use it now and again, but it doesn't really make any difference. So. Yeah, it's sold out now anyway, so what can you do? Osaka governor, Busan Kevin. Gargling like masks. Just one more thing that mainstream JP is common sense to protect health, and Americans just don't get it. Indeed. And this is the thing as well. For me, myself, by the way, that is the sexy man, not probably deliberately kind of awkwardly taken photo, but there he is saying that he's telling everyone gargle with iodine, and as a result, it's all now completely sold out. But yeah, washing your hands and gargling is something that kids get drummed into them as a routine when they're kids. And part of it is that the winters here are so dry, you do get just dried out. And if you've got a dried out nose and throat, it's really easy to catch germs and, catch colds and influenza and all that sort of thing. So sure, it's a good thing to gargle as part of your daily routine, and people do get educated about it here. And I didn't do it until I was living with Japanese. It's developed as a habit for me, and I've noticed. I mean, I had sore throats my first 2 or 3 years here. I didn't know about the need to get a humidifier. I didn't gargle, and I had sore throats, like blood coming out of my throat, sore throats all winter, all the time, and I was always sick. And it's amazing how well it fixed it. So yeah, the Atomic Tom, good to see you there in the comments, and Accent, good to see the Iodine Rush, indeed. Didn't Trump fire Bolton? Yes, he did. And then he wrote a book. So I don't know, maybe Bolton was making it up, but still, I mean, he's a former Secretary of State. Or was he Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State? Well, it was who can keep up with all the people working in the US government? Yes, indeed. So that was what happened in Osaka. Dumb people are indeed universal. Yeah, don't worry. Don't ever feel like people here are smarter. While we're talking about Nagasaki, and we're already 35 past. Although I started a little bit late, but let's push through. Indeed, while we do commemorate the A bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima this week, and if you talk with most people, I think, and even in New Zealand or Australia, when they talk about World War II and what they know about it, they basically, the first half of World War II in the Pacific was Japan raping and rampaging across, Asia mostly unopposed, and then, then the Allies all sort of got together and then pushed them back, and then they dropped the 2 atom bombs, which then the 2 atom bombs made Japan realize that it was futile fighting against this. It was, and ultimately they saved lives because by dropping those bombs, they avoided the loss of life that a land invasion would have caused. And and this is the great debate is those A bombs, in Nagasaki they killed 70,000 people, in Hiroshima they killed 100,000 people, but those were mostly military. In Japan, everyone was really in the military and brainwashed anyway, and in the end of the day, it saved lives, and we had to do it, although it was a terrible thing. And, we're very sorry, and every year on the anniversaries, the anniversary of the Nagasaki A bombing, they want to make us feel guilty for dropping the bombs. Well, we had to do it. It's funny how you see Twitter doing this every year, and anyone who brings it up. Two problems with that. One, Japanese don't even debate the A bombings, but the idea that the A bombings were like the thing that was so terrible that they had to do twice, and it ended the war. The level of destruction caused by the A bombings, essentially what they did was, and they were a very large explosion, not unlike what actually that explosion of the ammonium nitrate in Beirut this week was like a small atom bomb in terms of its scale. It was like 0.4 kilotons. It was comparable to these A bombs in terms of like the explosive power of it. I mean, it was an amazing blast. And a terrible thing, obviously. But the idea, what the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs caused, apart from the radiation and the blast, was, of course, they generated these enormous firestorms that caused these fires that, of course, also caused a massive loss of life as well. However, in terms of when you talk about firestorms that went and basically, in Dresden-style firestorms that destroyed entire cities full of people, the Americans did this to 60 cities in Japan, mostly before the A-bombs. They did this from Toyama to, Okayama, Osaka, Tokyo, everywhere. In Tokyo, in the case of Tokyo, the loss of life was greater than with the A-bombs. So on the one hand, to me, of course, it's thank heavens we haven't used nuclear weapons ever since. It kind of like, in a way, it's like confessing to part of what you did, in order to say, the A bombings were really terrible. Sorry about that. We won't do that again because, we believe in morality, and, that was, A bombs are immoral and we won't use them anymore. And then you go off to go and bomb Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam or whatever, and you're still carpet bombing cities. And it's like, so long as you don't use nukes, it's okay, because, it's like they've never confronted the other things. And in the end of the day, was the problem the fact that it was an A bomb? Was the problem the fact that they killed 100,000 civilians in a city, indiscriminately, by setting a lot of them on fire and irradiating them and killing them with a blast? And this is really what happened in Japan. And it's kind of funny, the whole debate about that. The Nagasaki thing, of course, it is used, and the mayor talks about, a world without nuclear weapons and the nuclear ban test test ban treaty and whatnot, that the cities are engaged in. But when you talk with people, they talk about the meaning of Nagasaki and these commemorations in Japan is not about the A bombings or this horrible thing that they did to us. It's about the evil of war, which is an acknowledgement, one, that it's neutral. Japan was committing war as well and was killing civilians. But when and this is the point, when regular people who were civilians in Japan experienced this, they realized that war is a terrible thing, and war is what needs to be avoided. And when you talk about the debates that should be being had on these anniversaries, if you ask me, it's not about using A-bombs or not using A-bombs, or did they need to use the A-bombs, or did they need to take lives to save lives, or was it necessary to break the will of the Japanese people in order to get the surrender? It's about was it ethical to be deliberately pouring napalm from the skies over wooden cities full of people in order to break their will to make them surrender? And this is where you get into the other things. I mean, bombing and targeting of civilians, or even if you're not deliberately targeting civilians, which they were deliberately targeting civilians in World War II. But even if you're talking about it as collateral damage, I mean, again, I don't think the West or America claims to be, aiming for civilians in Iraq or Afghanistan, but from Pakistan, from drone attacks in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, 250,000 dead civilians by some counts. I was looking at this today. And the US would call all of those collateral. They weren't aiming for them, but they were using tactics that were, and maybe that was the area where they were forced to fight. In a way, that was the enemy that was chosen and whatnot. But again, it's like we're not even questioning whether that's the evil that we should be talking about, whether that should be stopped, or not. It's like, so long as you're not using A-bombs, you're okay. The A-bomb debate is, of course, important, and of course we shouldn't use them, and thank heavens we haven't. But you can still do just as much, you can still cause just as much misery and suffering from other means as you can with an A-bomb. Just because it happens with an A-bomb doesn't make it, in the end of the day, if you have a firestorm or a bombing or a blast, like the Beirut blast, I mean, that was just a storage accident, it would appear. But if someone does that to you on purpose or whatever, I mean, in the end of the day, the result is the result, right? And it's not unlike in many ways what happened in these cases. And the question is, should you be able to do that to regular people? But that question doesn't get asked because people still want to have wars, and it's just kind of crazy. The Beirut blast reminded me immediately of the 2 explosions, I think, in Tianjin in 2015. Same thing, a bunch of ammonium nitrate, the same fertilizer that was used in the Oklahoma City bombing. Apparently gasoline or diesel fuel or something and fertilizer can be used to make these enormous bombs, and particularly when they're not stored correctly. This is what can happen. And again, these were sort of very, very, this is the equivalent of a lot of TNT basically, and terrible things. In terms of Japan, by the way, the go-to thing and the mixed messages and why the government approval is going down, this is a nice meme going around. I don't know who created this, but I thought it was quite good. People living in Japan getting a document. Please use go-to travel, but please stay home. It's not a state of emergency, but go out, please. But stay home for Obon. Don't go out after 10 p.m. morning. People living in Japan are getting confused. I thought this was quite a good summary of that amazing interview. Mixed messages. The government wants people to go to see their elderly relatives for Obon, but please don't get them sick. Spend money and travel, but take countermeasures and don't get anyone sick. And right now, record numbers in Okinawa. Right now, today they had 155 cases. They have 1.5 million population in Okinawa. Tokyo has 14 million. So basically, 155 cases in Okinawa is the same as having 1,500 cases in Tokyo. We were on 360 today. So just for an idea of how bad it is in Okinawa right now. Some people were asking, was that because of the troops partying too much on the 4th of July? That's probably part of it. There were US troops there. There was a couple of clusters on the US bases there. However, at the same time, Okinawa is also the Florida. It's the tourist destination, that people go to, and this is the summer vacation time. So I think it's also not a coincidence that the spike is happening right now during the holiday season, during the summer vacations. down there. So that's going nuts. Osaka got up to like 250 cases. They're getting up to like numbers that look close to Tokyo today. Nagoya as well, I think, got over 200 or close to 200. So now we're seeing basically all over Japan, other prefectures that kind of got off lightly when Tokyo's had it kind of hard. Now they're having record totals. And this is that the government has said that they don't want to declare another state of emergency. Part of the reason that they haven't declared the state of emergency, I've explained in previous weeks, was that there are not a lot of serious cases. They seem to have done a good job of at least preventing elderly or getting into elderly homes or elderly getting it, but that's kind of like a mystery given how there isn't any sort of lockdown or any sort of way of restricting that other than just sort of general diligence and probably elderly people being afraid and just staying at home and not going out. It is mostly young people getting it, and in Tokyo, again, we continue to have between 300 and 500 cases every day. And, there are still in Tokyo only 21 serious cases and no deaths for a while, which is good. But it's hard to think that, and the government said that they won't declare a state of emergency because they don't think it's necessary unless those numbers increase. But it's like, so they're going to wait for that to increase to then take the preventative measures to stop it increasing. This is why the approval ratings are going down at the moment. This week, the re-entry ban I mentioned last week has been eased. I think only 500 people can come in per day, and they have to get a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of coming back to Japan from the country that they're coming from, which I guess is tough for a lot of people. But again, a lot of people have been shut out for a long time from their families, from their jobs, from their from their apartments that they rent and so on, and it's been really disruptive for like 88,000 people, and it's not gotten any media coverage at all, which again makes a lot of people feel like, hey, so we don't matter, so you don't want foreign residents. And yeah, indeed, the ambivalence of that is pretty clear from this. But the good news is that they're coming back, so that is a thing. Abe's been absent from this whole thing, a bit like I've heard people say this was what Boris has been like in the UK. I don't know what the UK is like, but yeah, again, Abe's pushed his government ministers forward who have just said stupid things over and over. Savas Musician, good to see you. Yeah, I've heard the story about Kyoto. I heard the rumor as well. So they deliberately avoided firebombing the cities that they were thinking about using for the A-bomb, is what I heard. And they wanted to measure the impacts of the A-bomb. So they didn't want to start firestorms in other ways. And I've heard versions of the story that they wanted to spare Kyoto because the ambassador loved it so much, and the other is that they spared it because they wanted to leave it there in case they wanted to drop a third A-bomb there. And it's not clear, but yeah, I guess lucky for everybody that that one city was spared, but 60 cities were burned like to the ground by having petrol poured all over the people, or napalm poured over the cities and set on fire. Pretty horrible. But yeah, thank heavens for that. So anyway, Abe's pushed out these sort of idiot ministers who have been encouraging people to travel, but don't make people sick, please. And if you do, you're responsible, not us. While the governors have said, please, people, stop traveling. Okinawa's asked people not to travel down, but people have been traveling down and taking it down there and increasing the cases, which is horrible, especially in those sort of prefectures with a lot of elderly people. So that's not a good thing. Indeed, to travel or not to travel, different prefectures. Tokyo, Aichi, which has declared its own state of emergency, have come out and said definitely do not travel. Please do not travel for Obon. Just Skype your elderly relatives, and others, including the central government, have said, hey, yeah, travel, spend money, just don't get anyone sick, and if you do, it's your fault. So yeah, this is just a video I stumbled across this week. I lived in Singapore as a kid. I kind of knew things about the bits and pieces about the Japanese invasion of Singapore and some of the terrible things that happened as part of that. But I found this channel which is sort of covering the military campaigns of how Japan expanded into Southeast Asia, looking at each sort of battle, and it's kind of funny. I guess we don't spend a lot of time lingering on the details of how the Allies were defeated originally in Southeast Asia. And my impression always of Singapore, the story of Singapore, is that the British just were a bit too hubristic. They thought that they had a, unconquerable fort, and they weren't very well prepared, and they didn't take the Japanese seriously enough, and they were sort of caught out by that. Was sort of what I always thought the story was. But actually, looking at like the hour by hour like story of the invasion in detail that this video shows, WWII in Southeast Asia, the fall of Singapore, 1942. This video I found is, I recommend checking it out. It's just fascinating to me to understand the roles of the Indian, the Australian, the British divisions, what the strategic mistakes made by the defenders of the city were, and indeed how they discipline problems and whatnot as it sort of came apart, although that's not so emphasized. It's really a strategy breakdown. But it actually shows that the Japanese were sort of on a roll, and they were actually they were very shrewd and very, again, it was kind of humiliating to particularly Western powers to have a non-white power do this to them, and this is part of the reason, I guess, why we don't dwell on it. But if you look at it, it's actually like kind of amazing at the time, and of course terrible, and of course it was correct. They were kicked out later on, but yeah, it's a really great series of videos, so I recommend watching that. The Korea drama is still happening, where I mentioned the war reparations. War reparations were settled between South Korea and Japan in 1965 with General Park of South Korea, who asked that the details of the reparations being paid be kept secret because he wanted a free hand to use the money for South Korean development. So basically South Korea got paid all the compensation, and Japan got absolved from having to pay individual reparations cases to South Koreans by the South Korean government at that time, which was a dictatorship. In exchange for a shit ton of money, which they spent on internal, infrastructure, which contributed to the South Korean economic boom that happened after 1965. However, those people who never got compensation have started suing Japanese companies that used them as a conscripted war labor. Japanese would say, South Koreans would say as slave labor. Again, Japanese had to work in these factories as well, but I think they could still claim compensation later, or pensions or whatever later, and South Koreans couldn't. They were all made non-Japanese citizens after the war. And they never got paid because the payment was given to the South Korean government. The South Korean government didn't pay them. The courts, because South Korea have always protected Japanese companies from these claims, but lately the Supreme Court in South Korea said it would be unconscionable not to allow these people to get paid by these Japanese companies, which immediately said that the protection of the reparations treaty with South Korea is now sort of like moot, and people are free to sue Japanese companies in South Korea, and the assets of Nippon Steel have been seized, a bunch of shares, and now they're taking the steps to liquidate those shares in order to pay compensation. The compensation amounts are not high, but the Japanese government doesn't want to create the precedent of allowing the can of worms to open of of basically undoing the effect of the reparations treaty. So this is, among all the other things, is causing a lot of trouble. So the Japanese government has asked Nippon Steel to appeal, and they've done that. But if this comes undone, I mean, again, the already really difficult relationship with South Korea is going to get worse. If you'd like, hey, Sachifu, good to see you. Hi back at you. Play it. You want to see the Singapore vid? Aaron, I could play it, but it's like 15 minutes. It's a good watch for people who are interested. I missed your comment above. Have I read John Hershey's New Yorker piece from 1946? I may have. I'm not sure. This is talking about the A-bomb and LeMay, possibly. Quinn Rankin, Kyoto was spared because it was thought that the Japanese would never forgive bombing it. That's another version. I've heard lots of versions of that story, by the way. Let's go back quickly, catch up on comments. I am over time. Your mice, J Vlog's wife's grandmother, the air raid sirens, Nagasaki, was an early drop, but not a primary target. That's right. They were going for Kyushu, actually, which Space World, where they put all the fish in the ice skating rink, and they have a big space shuttle. It's at Kokura Castle. I've been there, actually. It's where Taro Aso is from. Ironically as well, I mean, the city that they ended up, the second city that they ended up dropping an A-bomb on is Japan's most Christian city. It's full of cathedrals and churches, mostly Catholic. And of course, it's the only city that foreigners were allowed into in Japan. So it's kind of crazy in a way that, a Western power chose that city to nuke. Of course, it was a secondary target indeed, but yes, indeed. Bad stuff down there. Blew the lid off the cover-up in the situation. And the book Fallout. So this is talking about, is this the Fallout? This is talking about the results of the bombing in Hiroshima, or the motivation for it, which I know is a long debate. I'll look it up. Thank you for the tip there, Aaron. You have been stacked with stories in the last few weeks. Yes, I have. Hiko doesn't have many stories, but he does carry on a bit. Thank you, Mr. Cordychep, and that's why you come back every week. Utu. This is a great movie. It's probably illegal that it's on YouTube, but it's there. If you want to know about New Zealand, and this is set after the land wars, which happened in the 1860s in New Zealand, in the 1870s. It's about it's a fictional, but like many episodes that happen in New Zealand of a sort of a renegade Maori kind of quasi chief who sort of sets up a sort of and basically Utu means revenge in Maori, or payback. And sort of he starts taking retaliatory raids against the settlers, and some of the settlers in turn, who become victims of him, also set out on revenge raids. And it's kind of a I watched the extended cut of this the other day. It's like 2 hours there, and it's just so good. Just because there's no good guys, they're all sort of understandable bad guys. The whole thing, and I was like, wow. And it's from 1983 in New Zealand. I didn't think we made anything good in New Zealand in 1983, but it turns out we made a good movie. So if you're interested, it's actually good to watch. Japan and UK agreed to free trade deal. The UK didn't get accelerated access to selling cars in the UK, which means that probably UK is not going to get anything better on agricultural products, which is a shame, because I would even take UK butter if we can't get New Zealand butter in here. There again, I mean, UK probably has done quite well, I would assume, given that they don't have the leverage of the whole EU bloc anymore, but they've probably got a similar deal. The Japanese Trade Minister Motegi, he's flown over to London to pose for the photos and sign this deal. Interestingly enough, he will be flying back to Japan this week, and he will not be isolating or tested when he gets back, which is interesting. I'm not sure it's really setting a good example for a cabinet minister, but at least emphasizing that Japan, doing the right thing by UK. Some high school schools are no longer forcing high school baseball players to shave their heads, and that makes news. Which is the whole reason why I love I grew up playing cricket, and baseball is a great sport. And the way that Americans play baseball, at least not below the pro level, like as a social sport, I think is great as well. But the Japanese baseball culture, the sort of shaving their heads and pretending like you're World War II recruits, I don't like. And I'm kind of glad that my lad is not into it. As much as I would love for him to be into baseball as a sport, I don't like the Japanese baseball culture and the way that they treat the kids who play it. They shave all their heads and make them march. And, I grew up in army camps, and those kids playing baseball look like they're acting like probably the same high school kids that were in military uniforms in World War II. Again, my thing before, BBC put up this article yesterday, can nuclear war ever be morally justified? The idea of saving lives, killing fewer people to save more lives. The whole thing is wrong-headed. It's like by just focusing on nukes, you're ignoring like rape in war. You're ignoring, and rape again. That's a tool used directly by the Russian military when they were invading Germany to break the will of the opponent. Used by the Serbians in Bosnia. It's absolutely weaponized. And it absolutely happened from the Allies. I mean, in northern France, and it happened in Japan as well. I mean, not as a strategy or whatever, but the idea that, but it can be used the same way. The idea that, well, if you break their will to fight, then in the end of the day, isn't it justified by the ends? Carpet bombing cities, firebombing cities. It's like, is it just nukes that we should be talking about with this? Of course, good to be talking about, and glad that we haven't used nukes. But I do feel like we're kind of trying to focus on one really small part of the problem to avoid having to deal with the rest of the problem. And it's misguided. Again, in Japan, other than, hey, yeah, no nukes, cool, but no war, is what people in Japan, people say no war, not no nukes. I mean, they say no nukes as well, but it's not the focus. And I think this BBC thing, again, is just kind of misguided, and it kind of shows the whole way that we kind of deal with the guilt by just focusing on one part of it and feeling like we've done a good job by not nuking anyone, but I still think that we're kind of missing it. The whole TikTok thing, that's my concern. That is the US about to split the internet? That's kind of the concern, that this could be extension of censorship. I think this is the final story. We're getting close to it anyway. Caesarea, the cheapest quasi-Italian food family restaurant chain in Japan. They're actually pretty good. They're promoting wearing these face masks that can cover your mouth while you're allowed to eat, which I question whether that has any purpose. Some Japanese people say it looks like Japanese traditional underwear, that has sort of like the loincloth hanging in front. The other thing, it also reminds me of the Japanese sort of commercial channel that did a demonstration saying how English is more dangerous for COVID-19, because when people say this is a pen, the exhalation can cause like a tissue to blow out, and this looks like it was done for that test. So that's a thing. And this, oh yeah, the final thing, Shubus, I'm very sorry to raise this. Sachifu, don't worry, everyone can see the comment, so that is okay. Do I have Netflix? Yes, I do, and I have the Japanese version. That is also true, Aaron. This ship, the Wakashio in Mauritius, of course, it's a huge, it's a cargo ship that's ran aground and it's spilling a lot of oil that was going between China and I think Middle East. In any case, the company that owns it, Mitsui, and the Nagashima, like Nagashika Holdings, these two Japanese companies have gotten up and they've said that our ship will support the remediation. It looks like a huge environmental disaster in an island that relies on tourism for its pristine environment. So this is a terrible thing. But with apologies to Shivas, this is what always happens with these ships. Is that they're always flagged with the Panamanian flags. And the reason that these ships that get into these accidents use the Panamanian flags is because Panama has a whole industry where if you just put up the money for a registration fee for your ship in Panama, they basically don't require any of the safety inspections that other countries put these shipping companies through, which are really expensive and difficult to comply with. So if you want to buy a rust bucket and not have to worry about safety, you just put the Panamanian flag on the ship and you pay a registration fee and you register in Panama. And every time you see one of these ships get into a thing like this, they're always Panama registered, and that's what's on top of everything else. Apart from the fact that this looks like an Exxon, well, it's not exactly an Exxon Valdez, but it's a huge, terrible sort of oil spill, fuel oil spill in a really pristine sort of part of the world. And I don't know. I think it's actually aggravating that the ship was clearly being flagged for the purpose of avoiding maintaining the ship properly. And I don't know. I think that there should be enhanced penalties for ships that get into accidents that use that. Yeah, that's right. Well, it's not just a tax dodge. It is a tax dodge as well, but it's also the inspection and the shipping safety standards and ratings. I think you do have to show up in Panama once every few years, but in terms of the inspection standards on the ships compared to American or European or Japanese, like if you have a Japanese flagship, the inspections are the warrant of fitness type inspections that they do are much more rigid, and it's those costs as well. It's not just the tax saving. It's an annoying thing anyway. It is a thing that happens, and nothing against Panama, but but when a clearly Japanese ship is using that flag, they're doing it for not good purposes, and these are the results. Already talked about Okinawa, already talked about Nagasaki. This is interesting. I watched a video the other day. 2 more to go. Yeah, it's a safety regulation dodge. Greg, I'm sorry, you made me laugh. That's a good comment. That's exactly. The Brits almost dropped the A-bomb on Hiroshima. I didn't know this, but apparently the B-29s, when they were first developed, the bomb bay doors could not fit the A-bombs, and they couldn't really carry them. The only airplanes that the Allies had that actually had bomb bays and the lifting capacity to actually lift these bombs were Lancasters, and there were actual Lancasters painted all black that were in America being prepared for that purpose, but the Americans didn't want non-American planes to drop the bombs, so they actually had to modify some special B-29s to be able to drop the A-bombs. I had no idea about this. I did know about the Project Manhattan in Los Alamos. Actually involved New Zealand scientists, British scientists. It was a joint allied project. In fact, the man who split the atom, Ernest Rutherford, was a New Zealander, and New Zealanders from his lab. There were a lot of New Zealanders in Los Alamos. I actually had classmates in high school, or a classmate in high school who was from Los Alamos. His father was a nuclear physicist, actually on the Project Manhattan team, who worked for Rutherford's lab. So, this wasn't just an American thing. And fascinating, I had no idea. They actually had a crew and a plane and everything all ready to go. But at the last minute, the Americans said, no, we have to do this with an American plane. So they actually modified a B-29 to do it. But yeah, they almost used a Lancaster for it. The final story of the night is that some people going back for Obon to Aomori had basically harassing notices posted on their door saying, go home, we don't want you here, you horrible people, what do you think you're doing? You think it's safe? Go back to Tokyo. Inaka, countryside hospitality. Yeah, good unless they think you've got a disease. That's wow. We are way over tonight. Well, I guess it's the A-bomb anniversaries. I hope you enjoyed the show. I will go back. Was that the Mark Felton video? Maybe it was a Mark Felton video. Oh yes, that was the Mark Felton video on the Lancasters, the British A-bomb. That was fascinating. Mark Felton. That's another good channel that I do watch. Quint Rankins. So thank you for that. Steve from Berkeley did not know this. I knew about the modification of the American bombers, but not that they're looking at British bombers. Yeah, they actually had. So the Mark Felton video came out this week. It was actually fascinating. So you learn something new every day. It was really good. It was Brits. Thank the Brits for the tube alloys, indeed. Aaron, going to have to expand my show and accept it will go to 1 hour 30. Yeah, I've got to do something about that. I didn't think it'd go 1 hour 30, but it has. But yes, I do have Netflix. I have the Japanese version. I don't really watch a lot. There's not a lot of good stuff on right now. I'm struggling with that, but yes, indeed. And you can see them. That's right. Go into Flipboard and search for Simon. You can see them all with the links yourself if you want to look up any of these, including the videos. Boom. That's been way too long. Sorry, it's midnight. It's a public holiday in Japan tomorrow, so that's part of the reason I don't mind running over time. The FMI, good to see you. Omotenashi, indeed. Have a good week, everybody. Please stay safe. If you're in Japan, I suggest don't go to. Just stay where you are. Skype your friends. Keep cool. Stay safe. Take care of each other. Be awesome. Have a good week, everybody. See you same time, same place. I will try to keep it within an hour next week. Good to see you all. Same time. Remember, 10:30 p.m. Japan time. Now I've got the comments fixed. Yay. So see you all next time. Mr. Kordichev, didn't the show go for 1.5 hours, but I had to shorten it? Yes. Not many topics. I did say not many topics tonight. So yes, I think you can see the patterns here of technical issues and overrunning, but there's just so much interesting stuff happening. Indeed, if you like, I don't know about you, I'm exhausted, so if you like, please like. I could use the moral, the moral support. Have a good week, everybody. Please stay safe, and see you next week. Boom, and remember, follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with all this stuff. Boom, peace. Ending stream. Oh, Sylvana Thavana, good to see you there in the comments, and thanks, and the Milchman too. Also, have a good week. See you all. Good night.